This is the Breaker.news podcast for the week of July 11th, 2021. I'm Bob Mackin, publisher of theBreaker.news and host of the Breaker.news podcast. Welcome to edition number 194. The Breaker is your source for news, opinion, and analysis about British Columbia issues, institutions, and influencers. Later, I'll tell you how you can support The Breaker. On this edition, headlines from the Pacific Rim and the Pacific Northwest. The Is It Just Me commentary. I award a virtual Nanaimo bar to a difference maker. And the big deal feature. The June 2021 West Coast heat wave that sizzled Oregon, Washington, and B.C. Records melted. B.C.'s ambulance service reached a breaking point. Hundreds died. Was global warming to blame? Why didn't Dr. Bonnie Henry declare a BC-wide public health emergency? Why didn't government officials learn from the heat wave of Chicago in 1995? Hear from BC Premier John Horgan, New York University sociologist Eric Klinenberg, and University of Washington atmospheric scientist Cliff Mass. But first, is it just me? Is it just me, or there are some simple rules to life, such as don't spit into the wind, don't shout fire in a crowded theater, and don't use your platform as a human rights activist to proclaim burn it all down when churches are being deliberately burned down. Harsha Walia of the BC Civil Liberties Association did just that when she tweeted a link to a story about the vigilantes burning down Catholic churches in BC and beyond. She claimed she didn't literally mean to burn down churches, just the idea of the institution behind decades of abuse and sorrow at Canada's Indian residential schools. If it had been a right-winger suggesting that mosques be attacked, Walia and her left-wing followers would have called that a dog whistle comment worthy of cancellation and a hate crime conviction. Why was Walia's comment so outrageous and her explanation so feeble? Walia has a position of power at a prominent charity that has a history of defending Canadians' constitutional rights, including the freedom of religion and the freedom of peaceful assembly. Those rights are in Section 2 of the Charter. Walia's claim to fame is advocacy for refugees. Church sanctuary is often the last hope for a refugee facing deportation. Walia also has a law degree. A Catholic church with a century of history could contain a document or a photo that could help prosecute corrupt clergy in a court of law. A document or a photo in an old church could also help put names to the bodies of the children who never made it home from those residential schools. Canadians who believe reconciliation is possible want the Catholic Church held accountable. But if the evidence goes up in smoke, so does any hope of truth or justice. What do you think? Email bob@theBreaker.news. Now it's time on the Breaker.news podcast for Around the Rim. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Rim. In the Hong Kong Free Press, top Hong Kong officials confirm fines for COVID-19 rule breach at lavish dinner in Wan Chai Club. 3 top Hong Kong officials have confirmed that they were fined for breaching COVID-19 social distancing rules after attending a 9-person dinner at a private Wan Chai Club in early March. The fines came to light while police were investigating a case of a woman who was sexually assaulted in her home after attending the dinner. A man has since been charged with attempted rape. Director of Immigration, Ao Kawang, and Customs and Excise head, Hermes Tang, admitted to breaching the regulations and denied any connection with the criminal case. In the Japan Times, Tokyo Olympics sponsors cancel booths and corporate parties. They have been frustrated by what one of the sources described as, quote, impromptu decisions by organizers. The games will go ahead without spectators. More than a dozen companies, including Canon, Tokyo Marine, and Nichido Fire Insurance and Ajinomoto, highlight the delicate situation for sponsors who have tied themselves to a games now hit by the COVID-19 pandemic and public opposition. Some 60 Japanese companies paid a record of more than $3 billion for sponsorship rights, and then another $200 million to extend their contracts after the games were delayed last year due to the pandemic. Unlike worldwide partners with multi-year deals, domestic sponsors are only involved in the Tokyo Games. In ABC News Australia, Prime Minister Scott Morrison backs Melbourne pubs vaccination promotion offering free beer. The offer was pulled after the regulators highlighted alcohol, tobacco, and medicines cannot be used as incentives for health services. But Mr. Morrison said the government had spoken to the TGA and, quote, common sense would prevail. The Prince Alfred Hotel publican behind the offer said he would reintroduce a vaccine promotion but would make sure it was based around food, not alcohol. That's Around the Rim on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast. Now it's time on the Breaker.news podcast for Cascadia Calling. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Northwest. In the Oregonian, Oregon won't release more info about heat death victims, but Multnomah County says it will. The county said that it has begun a report looking at the demographics, type of housing, geographic location, and cooling circumstances around the deaths of people who were confirmed to have succumbed to hyperthermia. So far, 46 deaths have officially been linked to the heat, and a total of 71 are confirmed or suspected. Statewide, the number is 116. During the height of the heat wave between June 26th and June 28th, temperatures soared into the triple digits across many parts of the state Fahrenheit. Highs in Portland peaked at 46 degrees Celsius. In the Seattle Times, Washington State's heat wave blamed for at least 78 deaths. Coroners, medical examiners still counting. The state health department said 19 counties have reported heat-related deaths. The heat wave's deadliest day was June 29th, when it was to blame for 33 deaths statewide, according to the state health department. The statewide death count is considered preliminary, and the state health department said it will take at least another month before a near final count of deaths due to the heat is available. Beginning July 1st, the Seattle Times contacted all 39 Washington counties to request information on heat-related deaths. So far, counties have reported at least 99 suspected or confirmed deaths to the Times. In Czech news, heatwave likely caused a significant uptick in missing cats across capital region, says Rome. According to Rome, which is reuniting owners with animals missing, there has been an influx of missing cats in the region, and they suspect it is likely due to the heat wave that scorched Western Canada. The organization said it's seen double the number of reported cases this year compared to last year. It said 25 cats were reported missing July 2020, but now 50 cats have been reported missing within the first week of the month alone. And these headlines in the Breaker.news. BC Legislature tech budget balloons in the wake of November's mysterious hack. McCallum backs Surrey police decision against lie detectors for veteran cops. Horgan, Henry, and Dix fiddled while home burned. Read the stories behind these headlines at theBreaker.news. This is the Big Deal feature on the Breaker.news podcast. Before the devastating wildfire, Lytton, BC made global headlines. It became Canada's hottest place on record at 49 degrees Celsius. The bigger story? Hundreds of people died around British Columbia because of the heat wave. A case of political apathy. Officials failed to declare a province-wide state of emergency. The same officials who repeated the buzzword unprecedented. They were simply unprepared. Here's Premier John Horgan on June 29th.
As Dr. Henry said, fatalities are part of life, and the consequences or the causes of those fatalities are examined by officials that we put in place as a society to make sure we're getting the best information possible so that we can put in place programs and policies to protect people going forward. And again, this was an unprecedented heat wave, records broken day after day. The public was acutely aware that we had a heat problem, and we were doing our best to break through all of the other noise to encourage people to take steps to protect themselves. But it was apparent to anyone who walked outdoors that we were in an unprecedented heat wave. And again, there's a level of personal responsibility. I'm not ducking the issue at all.
From June 25th to July 1st, BC's coroner counted 777 sudden and unexpected deaths, a whopping increase from 232 in the same period last year. But it was not without precedent. Temperatures reached 34 degrees Celsius at Vancouver International Airport on July 30th, 2009, more than a dozen degrees hotter than normal. 390 people died in Vancouver during the hottest week of 2009, from July 27th to August 2nd, compared with the average 290 deaths for all summer weeks in 2001 to 2009. Senior citizens living on their own were the biggest victims in a city where air conditioning is the exception, not the rule. Heat waves are the deadliest of natural disasters, but the fatalities are preventable. North America's biggest heat disaster of the 20th century was in July 1995, when 739 people died in Chicago over 5 sweltering days. At the time, Chicago Mayor Richard Daley downplayed the disaster with these words, saying, quote, "Let's not blow it out of proportion," end quote. This is what it sounded like in July 1995 on WBBM TV News in Chicago.
But City Hall plays it cool. The mayor counsels common sense and tells all of Chicago what is becoming all too obvious.
It's hot. It's hot out there. We all walk out there. It's very, very, very hot.
The bodies started coming Friday evening. By Saturday, the Cook County morgue was overflowing. Refrigerated trucks had to be brought in to store the dead. Workers averaged 13 autopsies an hour, and still, the bodies kept coming. By Monday, the city's worst fears had been realized. Death toll soared. More than 117 on Monday alone. All told, more than 400 dead due to the heat.
We have to appeal to all the family members of seniors to call, go over there, see their mother or father or their aunt and uncle. That is a must.
The mayor's words provided little solace, and the questions at City Hall began to mount. Why had no formal emergency been declared by the health department? Why didn't the city use its catastrophe plan in place? And why weren't the police units put on overtime to reach out to seniors?
Well, Mayor Daley today named 18 members to the Commission on Extreme Weather Conditions. The mayor says the commission will conduct case studies on those who died in the heat wave with the goal of preventing anything like this from happening again. The members of the commission include experts who care for senior citizens, police, and fire officials. One member is a meteorologist.
New York University sociologist Eric Klinenberg is the author of the definitive book on the 1995 situation called Heat Wave, a social autopsy of disaster in Chicago. Klinenberg was unavailable to join us on this podcast, but he gave a talk in 2016 about the heat wave during an appearance at the Chicago Humanities Festival. Here is a clip from Eric Klinenberg's talk about Chicago 1995.
During the heat wave, about half of the city's hospitals went on bypass status, which means that they closed down, they closed their doors, they could not take any new emergency patients. Okay, so imagine if you have thousands of patients in excess of the norm who are coming in seeking urgent treatment for heat-related illnesses. The faster you treat them, the more likely you are that the person will survive or stay healthy. Unfortunately, not only did the city have to close down the hospitals, but the city had no system for monitoring which hospitals were open and which were closed. So an ambulance would come and be turned away and then have to hope that they could find the next hospital that was open. There were reports of paramedics driving for up to 10 miles trying to find a bed where someone could get emergency treatment. And of course that meant that there were delays in the system that kept other people from getting ambulances on time as well. While this is happening, the city gets involved in this incredible debate because people start to die. When they do, the mayor's taken by surprise. It didn't seem right to him. It didn't seem right to city leadership. And in fact, one of the amazing things about this event is, say, unlike a hurricane, where you have this advance warning and you can track the system coming through, if the heat just arrives and people aren't paying much attention to it, you don't do basic things to watch out. The mayor turned out to be in his beach house. The fire commissioner, who runs the paramedics, in the beach house. The health commissioner, also on vacation. Now, this can sound moralistic, but I don't mean it that way. I think of it sociologically. right? Because in this city, as in so many cities and so many societies, when it gets very hot, the leaders, the elite, leave town. They go to cool off. That's structural, we'd say. That's part of the way things work. It's not a moral matter that people who run agencies go away on vacation when it's uncomfortable. But it becomes a political issue when you don't have a system that recognizes risks and real dangers, and when people don't know that they should pay attention. So one of the consequences of the leadership being gone is that people who are running the agencies that could have done more didn't know or didn't feel confident that they could say, call in additional ambulances, pay for more paramedics to be on the job. They didn't feel comfortable making those calls because there was not an official city emergency. As it happens, the city of Chicago actually had a heat emergency plan on the books, but no one remembered to use it. $739 people in excess of the norm died during the worst week between July 14th and July 20th of 1995, 20 years ago. 739 people. A massive disaster, significantly more deadly than the fire, for instance. And what was really disturbing to so many people who followed the event is people in Chicago didn't just die. Hundreds died alone and were discovered hours or days after they perished. This is disturbing for all of us who care about the city, right? Because we are a city of neighborhoods. We are a city that works. We're a city that is integrated, that doesn't let things like this happen. And so I think part of that will not to know, I talked about in the beginning, part of the difficulty we've had as a city coming to terms with what happened here is that this is not just a story of a mayor's failure or of a political breakdown. This is a story of a sweeping set of social breakdowns in which we're all implicated in some way that's a little hard to get our hands around. Many people commented that one of the real tragedies of this event is that heat is actually pretty easy to defend against, right? Once you recognize that the heat is dangerous, you just have to immerse someone in an air-conditioned environment or in water, and they will survive. And hundreds of people did not get the personal attention and the refrigeration until after they died.
Klinenberg said Chicago has since developed one of the best heat response plans in the world, but French officials failed to take notice. In 2003, more than 14,000 people died in a heat wave. And of course, there was British Columbia in 2009 and 2021.
When the city of Chicago is about to have a heat wave, you hear about it on the radio and on television, right? Everybody is on alert. Political officials work with local media. We're told to check in on our neighbors and family members. They're very aggressive about monitoring the weather in ways we didn't before. The city has done wonders to locate and to identify and to contact vulnerable people, older people, people who live alone, people who are most likely to die in a heat wave. We do monitor the hospitals now, so we know which ones are open and which ones are closed. And of course, we declare an official heat emergency. Right, we would never make that mistake again. And so Chicago is in some ways a model for a heat emergency plan.
That was Eric Klinenberg, New York University sociologist and author of Heat Wave, A Social Autopsy of Disaster in Chicago. He spoke in 2016 at the Chicago Humanities Festival. B.C. Premier John Horgan tweaked his message on July the 6th, admitting the NDP government was focused on ending the coronavirus pandemic restrictions, but he did not admit fault for the failure to urgently broadcast the heat danger and remedies to the public.
We were a bit jolly on Tuesday, I have to say. Dr. Henry, Minister Dix, and I, and Minister Farnworth, who was overseeing this longest ever state of emergency, we were a bit giddy at the prospect of saying goodbye to the emergency and stepping, of course, into the third step of our restart plan. So it came, and the prospect of hotter weather, again, we didn't think of it as catastrophic hotter weather. We thought of it as hotter weather, and I don't think there are too many people that didn't. Warnings were there, to be sure, and We did our best under the circumstances.
The late June heat wave of 2021 will go down as one of Cascadia's deadliest non-disease public health tragedies. The last week of June in 2021 was the hottest since the last week of June in 1925, according to newspaper reports. The Victoria Colonist newspaper's front page headline screamed, "City wilts as thermometer breaks records," after it reached 35 degrees Celsius on June 25, 1925, in the BC capital. Elsewhere, Portland hit 40 Celsius, Sacramento, California, 44 Celsius. My next guest is Cliff Mass, professor of atmospheric sciences at the University of Washington. Professor Mass hosts a popular weather podcast. He is the author of The Weather of the Pacific Northwest, and he analyzed Cascadia's deadly late June heat wave on his blog under the headline, "Was global warming the cause of the Great Northwest Heat Wave? Science says no."
If you look at this event, we start with a base of global warming. We'll start with global warming. The region has warmed up by about 1 degree centigrade during the last 50 years, and that may well be due to global warming. But the anomaly from normal was way larger than that. It was in the order of 15 to 20 degrees centigrade above normal. So global warming maybe contributed 1 degree centigrade for it, but the rest of it, the majority of it, the overwhelming proportion of it, was due to natural variability, due to natural processes in the atmosphere. So that's the key point I'm making. So global warming made this slightly worse, but we would have had a severe heat wave in Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia, even without it.
I asked Professor Mass what led to this heat wave.
Well, we sort of had the perfect storm of various components that came together. A big issue was a ridge of high pressure that built over us, centered over British Columbia. And high pressure areas like this are associated with warming. There's sinking air that's warmed as it sinks. And so we had this unusual high pressure area. But then we had another component. A trough of low pressure came in off the Pacific, approached the Northwest. And what that did is between the low and the high, it built up a large change in pressure that actually resulted in strong offshore easterly flow that descended the Cascades and the Coast Mountains to produce additional warming as the air sank. So we had a large-scale weather feature this high, and we had this trough that produced this very strong downslope flow. It's not unlike the Santa Anas in California, where you get very warm conditions when the air sinks on the mountains. So both of these things came together. And of course, this time of the year, the sun is extremely strong. So we had good solar heating as well. So a lot of components had to be there at the right place at the right time to produce this extreme heat wave.
Meteorologists were doing their job, but government officials and public health experts did not heed the warnings.
Well, the skill of weather forecasting has improved immensely over the past several decades. And it was demonstrated in this event. A week ahead of time, we knew something very unusual was about to happen. And by the time we got to 3 or 4 days out, we basically had nailed this event. Forecast that it was going to be an extreme event that was unequaled in recent history. So the forecasts were truly excellent, and public officials and whatever, they had the warning that this kind of event was going to happen. Not only we gave them a forecast, but we were sure about it. We have new tools that tell us how confident we are in the forecast. That's called ensembles. We run our models many times, and those indicated that there was very little doubt that this event was going to happen. So, I mean, I can't comment much about public policy. I'm a meteorologist, but the forecasts were there, and people should have acted on it.
Why didn't they take the heat threat seriously?
Well, it's not only heat. I think we have other examples, even locally. For instance, last year, the models were predicting strong, unusually record-breaking easterly winds that was going to go down the western slopes of the Cascades. And the warnings were there, and there was the potential for major fires with these strong winds. And we didn't see a proper reaction, like, for instance, de-energizing power lines so fires wouldn't be started. So even last year, we saw the inability to take advantage of the increased prowess for forecasting. I think, we have to stand back and realize that one of the great protections against environmental dangers is excellent forecasting. And governments have to learn how to use it.
Professor Mass said politicians, activists, and even some in the media exaggerated the impact of global warming.
I think that's true. I mean, global warming is a serious issue. But some people use these events as tools to make political points. And that's a problem. It's not only it's a problem also in that if you blame everything on global warming and fossil fuels, then you don't do what's needed to save and protect the population. A good example of that is wildfires. I mean, here in our region, wildfires have been increasing, but probably the main reason is that we've mismanaged our forests. And so if you blame it all on global warming, you don't spend the time and effort to fix the forests. And that's what's happened in our region. Various governments, like in Washington State, Governor Inslee, have really underfunded thinning the forests, bringing back prescribed burns to restore our forests to what they were 150 years ago. If they did that, it would radically reduce the amount of wildfires. So global warming is serious, but if you hype it and exaggerate it, you don't take the steps necessary to protect the population.
The West Coast also suffered a heat wave in late June 1925, but in 2021, Oregon, Washington, and B.C. are now major population centers with substantial industry. The world should have learned lessons from the deadly heat waves in Chicago in 1995 and France 2003. I asked Professor Mass about the future and whether we should be worried about a repeat sooner than later.
You won't see an event like this for many, many years. This was an extraordinarily unusual event. And so I wouldn't worry about a repeat of this so quickly. But if global warming continues, we'll slowly warm up. And as we slowly warm up, the heat waves will get warmer and warmer and hotter. So that we can expect, depending on what happens with global warming. But I wouldn't worry about an event like this happening soon. It was so unusual. Everything had to come together.
That was Cliff Mass, professor of atmospheric science at the University of Washington, author of The Weather of the Pacific Northwest, and blogger and podcaster. Check him out at cliffmass.blogspot.com. That's CLIFFMASS.blogspot.com.
When you face a storm, you won't stand alone. We'll all stand together, 'cause this is our home. And it don't matter what color you are, 'cause love will conquer hate. So you won't stand alone. You won't stand alone.
The virtual Nanaimo Bar, brought to you by Spruce Hill Contracting. Every week we end the theBreaker.news podcast on a tasty note by awarding the goodness of a virtual Nanaimo bar to people making a difference. A virtual version of the province's favorite dessert bar goes this week to Jody Wilson-Raybould, the independent MP for Vancouver-Granville who is leaving federal politics when the election is called. Wilson-Raybould was Canada's first Indigenous Attorney General in the Liberal government, but lost the job when Justin Trudeau wanted her to meddle in the SNC-Lavalin corruption prosecution. She did the right thing and said no. Wilson-Raybould will not run for re-election, citing the toxic partisan parliament and the concentration of power in the Prime Minister's office. You can nominate someone for a virtual Nanaimo bar. Send me an email to bob at theBreaker.news. Spruce Hill Contracting, custom homes and renovations. Find more information at sprucehill.ca. Spruce Hill Contracting, custom homes and renovations. Find more information at sprucehill.ca.
Vaccine, 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 vaccine. I'm begging of you, please don't hesitate. Vaccine, 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 vaccine. 'Cause once you're dead, then that's a bit too late. I know I'm trying to be funny now, but I'm dead serious about the vaccine. I think we all want to get back to normal, whatever that is, and that would be a great shot in the arm, wouldn't it?
That's it for the Breaker.news podcast for the week of July 11th, 2021. I'm Bob Mackin. Thanks for joining me. Did you know that on July 11th in 1921, 100 years ago, the Red Army took Mongolia from the White Army and the Mongolian People's Republic was born? Taking this moment to say hello, or Sanbano to listeners in Mongolia. Now you know. Send me your feedback. Send me your story ideas to Bob at theBreaker.news. Bookmark theBreaker.news. You can also find us at theBreaker.ca. Sign up for the email newsletter and get updates to your inbox. For news as it happens, follow The Breaker News on Twitter and visit theBreaker.news on Facebook. You can support The Breaker for as little as $2 a month. For more information, go to patreon.com/thebreakernews. That's patreon.com/thebreakernews. Until next week.